Hello and welcome. My name is Leah Kopke, and this is my 3D modeling podcast, Ambient 3D Animations. This week, we're going to be going through all the settings on the Spline Wrap tool inside of Cinema 4D. I had received a request from someone to cover the settings for this, so I'm really excited to go through it today. And if you have anything that you would like to learn, you can drop it in the comments below. If there's a certain tool inside of Cinema 4D that you would like me to walk through the settings for, I do care about what you guys say, so let me know what you think. And let's go ahead and get started and jump into Cinema 4D. So here you'll see that I have actually gone through and 3D modeled some lights as an example. This is the final rendering. But the reason why I'm showing this as an example is because what I had actually used in order to create these lights was the spline wrap. I used the spline wrap in order to create this cord and to create the profile for which the shape is being wrapped around the spline. I used a spline mask in order to create that. So if I go in here and look up spline mask, you'll see that we have this spline mask here, and that's what I used, and then I also used the spline wrap. So today we're covering the spline wrap tool, and I'll go over a few places where you can find those. The first place you can find it is using Shift-C will open up your commander here, and then you can just type in the name of the tool. You can also find it, I'll go over to our example file. You can also find it under the Create menu, under Deformers, because this is a handy dandy deformer here. And then we can go ahead and find it down here, Spline Wrap. So that's one area. Another place you can find it is if you hold a click over here. And you'll see we have our Spline Wrap. Right now I have a spline wrap already in here. You can also grab one from here or anywhere, any of those places we talked about. Shift-C. I'll actually just add in a new one here. Once we have our spline wrap, there's a few things we need to think about. We need to decide what we'd like to be wrapped around the object and what is the spline we're wrapping it around. So I made this sweep. You'll see the sweep is just made up of a star. Where's the star? The star is down here, so if you want to grab a star, you can. And then I just drew a straight spline. Put those into a sweep to make this shape with the star profile. I'll leave a link to the episode going through the sweep in case if you'd like to learn about that. But that's how I made this initial shape that I will sweep around the spline. You'll notice that our spline wrap has a bounding box, and this is the bounding box of the spline wrap. Is this square right here, and you can kind of see the direction of it based on this arrow on the inside. So that can be helpful. But we need this to realize that's wrapping this spline. So there's the way that I usually go about that is I like to create a null, and I'll put in the object that I would like to be swept, and I'll put in the spline wrap. And you'll see that the spline wrap is a pretty smart tool. It automatically moved that bounding box to around our object. But if for some reason it isn't, you can go down in your settings. So right now I'm in the spline wrap tool under object, and if for some reason the bounding box isn't lining up with your object, you can click this button here, fix bounding box, and it'll just automatically relocate that bounding box to your spline. And I'll show you a little bit why it matters if your bounding box is lined up correct. But that's the basics of where you need that to be. And I'll go ahead and talk a little bit more about the settings in here. Now we need to choose our spline to wrap it around. So we want to wrap it around the star here. So what I'll do is I'll once again click on my spline wrap. I'll drag and drop my spline in here, and you'll see it looks like absolute chaos. So we're gonna fix this, no worries. The first thing to realize is that our original shape was going up and down like this, and that's going in the Y direction. So we want this to set the axis for our spline wrap to recognize that this shape's axis was going in the Y direction. So we want to choose positive Y. So that's the first step. The other thing to make sure when you're using the spline wrap is that the object you're wrapping has enough segments. So actually I'm going to turn off the spline wrap for right now just so that we can go over this. So I hit that button there, so now it has an X, and that means that the spline wrap is no longer activated. And I'm going to change the display mode to garage shading lines. So let's take a look at this shape. Right now, we have a problem here. And I'm going to show you how to troubleshoot it. Do you see how many edges this spline has, or the shape has? It doesn't have enough edges. We need to be able to have a lot of edges and segments in order to be able to deform this shape. So let's look at our sweep here. We have the star profile that's being swept along this spline. So I'm going to change this spline from adaptive to uniform, and I'm going to increase the points. So now you can see we have all these edges along here. So this will be easier to deform. And if you want to learn about the different types of splines, I will also leave a link to the episode on all the different spline types, as well as how to create splines in the description. So if you want to learn more on those topics, you can. But now let's try turning on our spline wrap, and oh, it looks so much better. It's actually working, thank goodness, right? We want things to work in here. And if you look at this and you're like, this still kind of looks janky, it needs more segments, no worries. You can always go back into your spline and bump up this number until it looks nice and smooth and is deforming the way you'd like. I'm going to go into my filter and turn off my work plane so that that doesn't get in the way of us visualizing this in here. And let's walk through some more of the settings. So we have this cool option called strength. So just keep in mind that all of these diamonds you can keyframe. So you can keyframe the strength of this. You can animate this. If I make it 0, you can see that it's going back to its original form over there. I'm going to turn back on garage shading. The hotkey for that is NA. It's under display, just so that we can take a look more at the shape, because we already fixed the segments, which is what we need the lines for. If I increase the strength, you can see that it is slowly deforming more and more to fit the shape of that spline. So you can animate this, and this is really fun and cool to do, honestly, is animate and get that deformation in there animated with your strength. You can also choose the offset. So I think that the offset is a little bit more noticeable when you adjust the from and to. So from and to determines where your spline starts and where it ends along the shape. So the start and ending point of the star is actually up here. So when I adjust these, it's adjusting it from the end of the star to the starting point of the star. So from and to. And if I offset it, it's just having that spline go around. So you can animate the spline this way too and offset it. Super duper fun. You can also go beyond the 100%. So just a reminder of that. You can set that. I'm going to right click on this to set it back to the default. You have a couple different modes in here. You have fit spline, and with the fit spline on, I'm going to set this back to 0% for from and 100% to, just to show this fit spline. So fit spline will fit the shape of the object you're deforming to the entire length of the spline. Now, if you don't want to stretch out your object like that, you can choose fit length, and it'll just only use the length of that object to fit along the spline. And then you could do something like offset it going around. So it depends on what you're doing. How much do you want this object to be deformed? Do you want it to keep its original length? Those are what those modes determine. You can adjust the end mode, and I'm going to actually show this on this text object here. So I had made this text object in here, and I had just typed in spline wraps are cool because that's what we're talking about today. And as far as the spline wrap, I'm going to put these into a group so that it recognizes, okay, we are affecting this text object here. I'm going to call this text deformations. I also have the splines already set. I have the spline as the text spline bottom. This is our text spline bottom, this spline down here. Our text spline top is this curvy shape over here. We're actually going to use both of these and talk about rail splines now. So we have our spline wrap referencing both of those. So we're going to talk about the end mode as well as these options down here and how they relate to the rail. Another important thing that I'd like to just point out to you is that I made these meshes pretty dense so that they deform nicely. You'll want to have a dense mesh for whatever you're deforming so that it works. You'll also see that if I look at this, the shape of the spline wrap bounding box again is in the right area, because if I turn that off, that's the location of our original object. And that's what it's using to deform it. So that's all working correct. If I choose extend, when I offset this wrap, you'll see it just keeps going. It just keeps extending beyond that spline. If I choose clamp instead, it'll just clamp it off. So it just disappears kind of into nothing. So you have those two options. I'm going to change it back to extend and just push the offset back. There we go. So that's that setting that I want to cover. Now we're going to get into size. And size is really fun, so it's adjusting the scale. I'm going to turn on the scale from rail. And remember, the scale, the rail we are using that I put in up here is this top one, the one above. So I'll go ahead and use that and turn this on. And now you'll see that it is scaling based on the shape of this top spline, which is really cool. And if I move this spline around, you'll see it adjusts accordingly. So you can use another spline to control it, animate stuff. Now I know this looks pretty cheesy. I'm not suggesting you make this exact thing. I'm just showing the settings here. So that is that. You can also, instead of using scale from rail, you could choose to adjust the scale with a graph here. I can make it really, really tiny here, and then see it gets bigger, and you can see the text scales up and starts very, very small. So that's fun. You can also load a preset. So I could decide I like this triangle shape and choose that, and then it goes from small to big to small. You can also save a preset you make that's custom. I'm not going to do that today. You can also choose the strength of this. And again, this is keyframeable, so the strength could be 0 and then it scales up. Going to undo all of these so that we go back to the default, because now we're going to look at the option spline size. So the difference between size and spline size can seem a little bit confusing. But you'll notice that for this first one, regardless of where the offset is along the spline, the parts that are small are still small, and the parts that are big are still big, regardless of its location along the spline. Okay? I'm going to set that back to the default. Now let's say instead we use the spline size graph instead of the spline graph to control the size. I make it really small down here, and then it's big at the end. Now let's adjust the offset. So you can see that the scale is dependent on where it is along the spline instead of the object maintaining that scale regardless of where it is on the spline. So this one determines size based on location along the spline. This one determines size by just this object is going to be the size in this part of the object along the length of the object. So those are those two options. And it's a very similar concept when it comes to rotation. So if we go into rotation, we have rotation from rail. So again, we could use the rotation from the rail, and I could move this rail around and control the direction of the spline and rotation resulting based on this. So that's pretty cool. We also have the ability to adjust the rotation with a graph. So I could adjust it this way and have it twist like that. And again, since we're just using rotation and not spline rotation, the rotation remains consistent along the object regardless of where it is along the spline. You also have the option to adjust the banking. So this is like the default rotation of the object prior to applying the rotation to it. I'm going to right click on this left arrow to set it back to the default. You can once again adjust the rotation strength. So now it's at 0 and now it's twisting. And you can animate that as well. If we adjust the spline rotation, I'm going to first set the original rotation back to default so that you can see what these changes do. If I adjust the spline rotation and move this point up, you can also add additional points with the control button, move them around. You could see that now we have these twists in here. I'm going to move this over here. And if I adjust the offset, you'll notice that the twists are dependent on the location of the spline rather than the location of the object itself. So as I offset this and move it through the spline, the object is now twisting in this specific location along the spline rather than in a specific location of the object. So that's that. And just for funsies, I'm going to show you what happens if your bounding box is in the wrong location, because that's the last setting in here. Actually, this might show up better on the star example, so I'm going to go back to our star. If I move the location of the bounding box, you can see that when it doesn't line up quite right, it starts looking kind of weird and making new shapes. Now, this might be something you're trying to do, and then in that case, you can adjust this and you can keyframe it. Maybe that's a look you're going for. But you can totally get a different look with this. Actually, this looks pretty cool. But you could see how much of a difference your bounding box location makes for how this looks, and if it's wrapping around the location of your spline correctly, it needs to be lined up with your object in the deformer bounding box in order to line up with the spline you're actually wrapping around. So that's just something to keep in mind. And those are all the settings for the spline wrap. I hope you had fun checking out this tool. I had a lot of fun making this video, and I always enjoy reading your comments, and if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. If you'd like to learn more cool 3D modeling Cinema 4D stuff, please hit subscribe, and happy 3D modeling. I hope to see you again next week here on Ambient 3D Animations.